So, guys, I want to talk about Will Ospreay, and Will Ospreay made some comments that he's better than the WWE roster, and I do want to talk about that a little bit. That first of all, I do want to say that Will Ospreay is really a company guy, and one of the big things that happens in AEW is that they like to do a lot of smack talking of the WWE, and in professional wrestling, that's definitely very, very normal because you see what John Cena did when he said something to Cody Rhodes like, you know what, I make I make billionaires money, and Cody Rhodes, you take advantage of their kids. So there's always like going to be quips towards other companies. Or you even look at Max Caster when he said that rap line, I'm no filter, I ain't Instagram. I'll have you ass boys retire like Vince McMahon. So that's normal in professional wrestling. So when Ospreay says that or does stuff like that, you can't really just, be like, oh, well, he's being a sore loser or a petty little bitch. And then the other thing, too, is that you look at CM Punk, who before WrestleMania weekend did that interview with Emilio Hawani, and he was totally, like, ripping on AEW. And I do agree with what OTR Central said, that he's an asshole. And the truest definition of an asshole is somebody who goes through life hurting other people and not taking accountability. Even though he was instigated by Jack Perry, it was bad for him to assault Jack Perry, because in life there are situations where we are disrespected, where we are dealing with bullshit, other people's bullshits, but you have to be professional. He did commit assault. He did commit a crime, really, so that's in all professional wrestling. So anybody who has a criticism against Will Ospreay for smack and talking WWE, that's nothing really. But the other part of it, and I think the most important part, is that he says he's better than the WWE roster. But I like what CM Punk said, which is, if you're fully okay with wrestling in half-filled arenas or quarter-filled arenas and getting 5-star ratings by a guy who doesn't really matter, we're not in the same industry, and I totally get what that means, because honestly, that's true about Will Ospreay. That yes, he's had 5-star matches, he's done a lot of really great things for AEW, but yeah, it's not just about wrestling; it's story and wrestling. And the other thing about Will Ospreay, and I'll give you guys credit for, is that he and Kyle Fletcher had probably, if you made a list of the top 10 or the top 20 best AEW feuds, Kyle Fletcher versus Will Ospreay is one of them. Will Ospreay is a very passionate wrestler. He's somebody who can talk on the microphone. He's not like Takeshita, where Takeshita has a lot of potential, but his weakness is that he can't talk. Or you look at Bandito and, how he kind of sounds very weak and unmotivated and sluggish in how he talks. So you're not going to have Bandito ever be a champion of a company because he doesn't have that type of, bravado when he talks, really. That's very big to professional wrestling. So there are things that Ospreay has that help him out, and then there are things that, I'm sorry, the other building has, cops around, but the thing about it is Ospreay has strengths and he does have weaknesses. But I really think that, for him to say that he's he's better than the WWE roster, he does have significant weaknesses. And like I said, John Cena is one of the reasons why WrestleMania 41 or 42, I believe, drew over 70,000 people 2 days in a row. You also have Cody Rhodes, you have CM Punk, you have Roman Reigns in that, and they don't do the athleticism that you see with CM Punk, you see in Will Ospreay. So would you rather have Will Ospreay main event a WrestleMania and not draw and draw an AEW crowd? Because if you really think about it, you're looking at AEW Double or Nothing. I believe there's 6,500 people that are buying tickets, and one of the big matches, probably the biggest matches that they have, is Ospreay versus Hangman. So, and that arena is 20,000 people. So you're telling me that, imagine if WrestleMania was 6,500 people in a 20,000 seat arena. That's a failure, So So you have to think about that. He's not that big of a box office draw. But then again, you got Forbidden Door, and he's on the poster, and it drew over $1 million. And I had to look at how many tickets were sold for Forbidden Door, because I believe it's a 20,000 seat arena, and I believe they did over 10,000 people. So I'm gonna call that a success for right now. Really, I have to do my research. But in some cases, yes, he's a box office draw, but he's not going to draw a 50,000 seat crowd, really. At Wembley Stadium in 2026, it has to be proven if you have Will Ospreay in the main event, really, and that's going to, sell out Wembley Stadium. Is that going to draw like 80,000 people, in Wembley Stadium? Is that going to draw a WrestleMania level crowd? We don't really know. So there are things about Will Ospreay where it shows that he is a big draw, and then there's things that he has that shows that he may not be, as big of a draw as other people, really. And in professional wrestling, it is a business about marketability. And I think for a long time, one big issue with AEW is that they all fail at is tastes have changed. When you had Vince McMahon run WWE for a long time in the late 2010s, the Kenny Omega matches, the Will Ospreay type of matches, the New Japan style was very popular because WWE had a lot of long, boring talking. They had short matches, and it just felt it was just so much of a contrast, really. But there's been so much overexposure in AEW of the Will Ospreay matches, and I like what Cornette said. It's definitely video game wrestling because in a real fight, it would not go 40, 50 minutes. That's an extreme rarity. And the other thing about Will Ospreay matches is, and one thing about Will Ospreay, and this has to be talked about, is that he's a controversial wrestler. He's a very, very controversial wrestler with his wrestling style. Like, first of all, he does like those weak knee kick and those weak knee jabs to people. The other thing about him that's bad is you saw him at Revolution. He did hit the Spanish Fly, and the match continued for a longer period of time, really. So there's a thing about no selling. I like what OTR Central said, that you saw a match with Okada. He hits a pile driver on somebody. It doesn't take that person out, but then he hits the Rainmaker, which is a clothesline. So with Will Ospreay, he does have an issue of lacking physics in wrestling. The other controversial match he had was with MJF, where it was a 5-star match or a 5.5-star match. And what he did was that he actually went into the crowds, and they did a couple of moves for 3 or 4 minutes. And it's like, you can't do that in professional wrestling unless it's a false count anywhere match. So he's another person that doesn't say, hey, I'm not going to wrestle this match until you say it's false count anywhere, because we're not going to do all this shit in the arena. We're not going to do all this shit all over the place until we establish some basic rules. And one of the basic rules is that there is such a thing as a 10 count. You don't just not announce a 10. You don't just violate the 10 count rule and do whatever the hell you want, really. And then you have a person like Dave Meltzer. That's one of the rules of professional wrestling, is that you don't violate a 10 count match. You don't violate the 10 count rule unless you actually establish that. So he does have that other issue of breaking, some logical rules. So he goes on for too long. And then the other issue with Will Ospreay is that you look at the Don Callis family. Yes, he made Kyle Fletcher stand out a little bit. Yes, he made Takeshita stand out, but he's not made any new stars. It's like what I said with Adam Page. Adam Page made Swerve Strickland, but Will Ospreay has not made anybody in AEW. Because and part of that is his fault, because I think with Ospreay versus Kyle Fletcher, Kyle Fletcher should have won that match, and that should have happened, really. And then they should have had the Own Heart tournament where Ospreay should have won that. That's how I would have done that. So there are times when other people could have benefit if he said no, the other person should have won. And then the other issue is that, and I'll say this, the Don Callis family is the Will Ospreay jobbers. I like to joke and call them Team Rocket, because, just like in Pokemon, Team Rocket is always going to lose to Ash Ketchum. So all the Don Callis members, to me, I think that they're really just paid to be the Will Ospreay jobbers. And then it kind of makes me wonder a little bit about, like I said, I'm more worried about Josh Alexander. He's held the TNA championship for over a year. He's had these really epic matches. And now, his job is just going to be a Will Ospreay jobber. So, one of the issues with Will Ospreay is that, the Don Callis family, like how much closer is Konosuke Takeshita to being, the first Japanese world champion of a American professional wrestling company, knowing that you have people like Shinsuke Nakamura who are not utilized. And he also said something like, me no speak no English, jumping to the Japanese stereotypes. How much closer do you see Kyle Fletcher when Kyle Fletcher right now is a sexual predator gay man? That's kind of his gimmick. He's wearing all pink. He's acting flirty with Don Callis. He's doing like the cowboy ride on Hangman. So, I think with Kyle Fletcher, like I said, he's one of those people that he really needs to sign with NXT, or he really needs to say to Tony Khan, it's either NXT or you make me a world champion within the next 2 years. Or at All In, he needs to get the casino or whatever, World Heavyweight Championship shot contract, and then you got Will Ospreay be the champion. That's the best way to do it. That'll be the best way to do it. But as I said, part of that is Will Ospreay's fault for not establishing or not letting those people win when they should, or being like, hey, you know what? I'm a main event guy, so I need to talk to Tony and manage these other wrestlers that I work with and be like, hey, Tony, we got to make Kyle Fletcher a big deal. He should be the Ring of Honor champion over somebody like Bandito, who sounds very meek when he talks, really, So, and that's part of being a professional wrestler. Like with The Undertaker, I think it was The Undertaker. There were some wrestlers John Cena or CM Punk or Jeff Hardy, or The Undertaker helped, spoke up for them, as well, really. Or there were some wrestlers that talked to RVD and said, hey, you know what, RVD, you need to start pulling backstage politics. And that's what, Ospreay should be doing, really, So, I've said that, athleticism-wise, yes, there's nobody on the WWE roster that matches up to Will Ospreay. I will give you that. But there's definitely a lot of things that he needs to work on. And I do say that, one of the big issues of Will Ospreay, and I think one thing that he has to worry about, is that, as the old saying goes in Spider-Man, as soon as you become a hero, despite of everything you've done, eventually they'll hate you. And that could be that, when Will Ospreay wrestles, eventually it's going to get to a point where people are like, okay, that's a main event. That's a Will Ospreay main event. It's the same style of moves. He does a couple of twirls in the air, and then, he's like a gymnast, and he has matches that go on a long time. And then they're video game matches, because you're hitting people with pile drivers on guardrails like you did with Swerve Strickland, and you keep going on for minutes upon minutes and stuff like that. So he definitely does have a shelf life. And as I said, I think one of the other weaknesses about Will Ospreay that I have to give you is he's not a versatile wrestler. Hangman can do high flyer stuff. Hangman can be a brawler. Kyle Fletcher is the same way. He can be a brawler, and then he could be a high flyer. MJF's the same way. He can be a high flyer. He can do flips. He can be a brawler. He can be a sneaky bastard type of wrestler. But Will Ospreay, to me, doesn't have that versatility. So I think that while he does criticize the WWE roster, and I understand it comes from, just raising the smoke, really, and that's what happens in professional wrestling. That's not a new thing. There are a lot of things that Will Ospreay has to work on. I'm sorry, guys. Bug went into my throat. But the thing about it is that with Will Ospreay, there's a lot of things he needs to work on to be a better wrestler. And definitely, everything I've said about, just to reiterate, about how he needs to build more people, how he needs to look out for people who have potential, and build other stars, really. those are the things that are going to really matter long term. And if he does not have that, that's going to make him, suffer really, So, like I said, one of the reasons why WWE was so successful is because you had The Undertaker, you had Shawn Michaels, and you had Bret Hart and a lot of other wrestlers backstage that were like, or even like Hulk Hogan, who said like, hey, I got to pick my group of people. I got to elevate my group of people and talk backstage to the booker and be like, hey, you know what? You should be booking these guys when they know that someone has great potential. You don't do what Bryan Danielson did and you see potential in somebody like Wheeler Yuta when Wheeler Yuta doesn't have potential. But you get what I'm saying, really. And like I said, the biggest failure of Will Ospreay is that the Don Callis family, in my opinion, they are the greatest faction in AEW. They have so much potential. They look legitimate, but they're still the Will Ospreay jobbers. So honestly, Will Ospreay should have done a lot with the Don Callis family to elevate them. So like I said, that, he's on another level, but to get on another level for him is working on a lot of different things as a professional wrestler, being more versatile, building people, sometimes saying, he should lose matches, and sometimes, just elevating others really, because like I said, Don Callis family has a lot of potential, but they are the Will Ospreay jobbers. And I'm worried about people like Josh Alexander, who I don't want to see him just be tag teaming around and being in the faction and not having his full potential realized. Because, if you have somebody like him who can have long endurance matches, he has a really great look, he should not be just losing to Will Ospreay and palling around with Don Callis all the time, really. There's a lot that Ospreay can do to just, help others, build others, and be on another level, really. So I hope he looks at this as constructive criticism. He has something, but he can have something more.